Solar Aqua is one of the least known Canadian Rolexes outside of Canada, or even inside Canada. What is a Canadian Rolex, you ask? Well, it's impossible to explain what a Canadian Rolex is without mentioning Gruen, a once successful American watch brand. Rolex now makes almost every part of their watches in-house, but they used to assemble watches sourced piecemeal from various vendors, as did most watch vendors. Good old Hans Wilsdorf's favorite movement manufacturer at the time was Egler in Switzerland. He loved Rehberg and Hunter movements, and by 1920 Rolex was Egler's largest customer. Eventually, Gruen was buying all of the Egler movements that Rolex didn't buy. So the two worked out an agreement. Gruen would only sell watches using the Egler movements in the US, and Rolex would only sell watches using them outside the US. That's why it took Rolex so long to get a foothold in the US market. From 1938 to 1949, they used Canada as a test market for a line of manual wind watches with movements from Fabrique de Horlogerie de Fontainemelon FHF instead of Egler. These are what collectors call Canadian Rolexes. Solar was the in-house brand of the Eatons department store, a chain that existed in Canada for over a century. Watches branded only Solar and without the word Aqua have nothing to do with Rolex. Eatons sourced watches from many companies over the years, but Aqua was a Rolex trademark, which had been used as an alternative to the Oyster branding in earlier years. There were even some crowns that said Aqua patent instead of Oyster patent, but those are very rare. Some Canadian Rolexes were given Oyster cases, and Oyster cases have always been made in Switzerland. Complete watches were often taxed more heavily than incomplete ones, and it's unsurprising that Mr. Wilsdorf would be savvy about tariffs given his background in importing and exporting. From the late 30s to the mid-50s, Eatons ordered watches from Rolex, white-labeled as Solar Aqua. Any Solar watch produced by Rolex for the Eatons company was badged Solar Aqua on the dial and was an Oyster, not a Rolex. This was when Oyster was the second line of Rolex. The Solar Aqua name disappeared in the mid-50s when Rolex dropped the Oyster name as a second brand line, introducing Tudor as their second brand and using the Oyster name on both Rolex and Tudor. This watch is a Solar Aqua model. The Aqua label was intended to draw the shopper's attention from the famed Rolex Oyster case. This model is a Solar Aqua reserved for Canadian Oyster cases. It has a Rolex modified Swiss calibre 59, 17 jewels, manual wind. Finding any information on this specific watch has been difficult. I believe this watch is from 1939. Almost all Canadian Rolexes, which were largely sold to Canadian soldiers preparing for World War II, were powered by Fontainemelon FHF30 movements, which Rolex called calibre 59 and sometimes calibre 65 when used in their watches. It was widely believed that all Canadian Rolexes of the 1940s had the FHF30 movements. The plate on the back of the movement is sometimes marked Tudor on later models, yet the movements could have been marked Rolex, Tudor, or even Oyster Watch Company, as they were using the same movements branded in any of those names. This original dial is in amazing condition for its age and has a nice even vintage patina. It features luminous radium number hour markers, as well as a crisp red 24-hour military trap. The sub-seconds register is missing the usual anti-magnetic script, which also leads me to believe this is an earlier model. The watch has blued, pencil-shaped, luminous hour and minute hands, still containing all of the original radium lume. The minute hand reaches all the way out to the railroad-style minute track on the dial. Overall, this is a fully original timepiece made by Rolex that has aged beautifully. The steel case measures 30 millimeters wide by 39 millimeters long. In one of the photos, you will notice the original Rolex Oyster patent crown is still fitted. The crown still screws tightly onto the case tube. The watch still running, not great, but still running. I'm not sure about the numbers on the outside of the case back. They don't seem to correlate to anything that I can find of the watch itself. The watch came on an old brown leather strap. Fitting it to this new bun strap seems to suit it so much better. I'm going to use some polywatch on the crystal and see if I can get that cleaned up nicely also. Well, thanks very much for watching this, everybody. If anyone has any information that they might like to add, please leave it down in the comments. I'd love to know if anybody knows about these watches more than I do, which, to be honest, wouldn't be very hard. So, appreciate y'all watching. Take care. I'll see you again next time. Cheers.